Добрый день.
Good. Let us start. I'm Victoria Zakrevska. I'm the partner of TRUMAN Agency Company. We are the co-authors of the draft, which is Audit of Ukraine's Foreign Policy Index of Relations. This is the project together with the Institute of World Policy. I speak Russian because the leadership of TRUMAN Agency companies from Belarus, and our knowledge of Ukrainian is not very good. I can tell that our project is just only 1 year old, and our choice to build our future in Ukraine is not accidental. We believe that everything will be fine. Despite all the difficulties, we will all achieve success. I will say a few words on what is the report like this time. This is our first report. Its frequency, it will be issued every 2-3 months. The text was adapted for the general audience, and some specific terms were changed. My colleagues will tell about that. The report that you see today gives a brief overview of the chapters, and the more complete information could be sent to our partners and the clients. Any comments from the representatives of mass media on the methodology, on information is welcome. We want this product to be interesting, and I would like to give my floor to the colleagues from the Institute of World Policy. Alyona, Getmanchuk, good afternoon. Thank you, Victoria. On my behalf, on the behalf of the Institute of World Policy, I can say this is very important event for us because we believe that index of relations is one of the components of our large-scale project audit of foreign policy of Ukraine. You know that the Institute of World Policy this year is implementing the audit of foreign policy project. We analyzed our relations with 17 countries of the world. We have discussed here as well, and we presented that, and by the end of the year we will add several more countries. Also, we are making interviews with the ambassadors of Ukraine. There is a sociological survey on what the average Ukrainians believe to be the foreign priorities of Ukraine, and in December there will be a big political forum where we will be presenting all our achievements. The index of relations is important because that is a quarterly assessment of relations in key directions. I cannot say with key partners, but we're talking about key directions. And we also offer, besides the relations with the USA, European Union and China and Russia, a special topic which probably was not the most significant in a certain quarter, but which is worth to look at from the point of view of prospects for the developing of the situation. Leonid Litra, our senior analyst, will tell us more about that. I was also working on the topic relations Ukraine-the USA, and I will say a couple of words about the this last quote, and then I will give the floor to Leonid, and he will present the special topic, and our experts, Sergiy Solodkyi, who has the biggest challenge, Ukraine-Russia, Andriy Goncharuk, our famous expert on China, and Natalia Gaidai, who has also a difficult challenge. She had to analyze relations with the European Union, and it's about bilateral and multilateral relations. The task was very difficult. So now, as to relations Ukraine-the USA, during the last quarter they were developing quite dynamically, despite the fact that the general line of Obama administration was clear. The latest days are not to the latest trend is not to allow the military escalation in the east of Ukraine, and not to allow any chaos on the rest of the territory of Ukraine. Also, there was the attempt to become a facilitator to move forward the Minsk process, and you've probably noticed the statements of the representatives of Obama, Susan Rice, in June this year, who said that they in the White House believe that by the end of the year very serious progress could be made in this direction. In Ukraine, the attitude to attempts of the US in Minsk process is perceived differently. There is the support of the position of the US as to sanctions at the level of G7 and transatlantic Union, and also the dialogue Nuland-Surkov is its importance. It has lost its importance after the dialogue of foreign political advisors of Normandy format was launched, and that is very active, and that's where Mr. Khoizgin or Mr. Yeliseyev from Ukraine can talk to Mr. Surkov. In the USA, they believe the situation is different as with Minsk, and the fundamental difference between Ukraine and the US is that in the USA they believe that Minsk could be implemented and it doesn't have any threats for the stability and functioning of Ukraine as the state. And many Ukrainians believe it is a big threat. Also in the US there is an opinion that today Minsk agreements could be implemented on better terms for Ukraine than a year later. The election campaign in the USA started. The nominees were appointed from the Republican and Democratic Party. Ukraine got into that discourse thanks to Donald Trump. Hillary Clinton made many statements as to Russia, but there was only one tweet as to Ukraine when Paul Manafort resigned after the publications related to his work in Ukraine. That's not the only factor why he left campaign. There were some other factors. And to say that it was exclusively because of Ukraine, and to say that it was Ukrainian factor that affected his resignation is impossible. In the US, People, the USA are working on restraining the Russian aggression. The issue of sanctions is of importance, as well as enhancing the defense capacity of Ukraine. The US has made a lot to have the meeting of the Commission Ukraine-NATO. They provided equipment, they provided advisors, the dialogue continued. Another one is fighting corruption, was very active as well. In the US, they have been focusing attention on strengthening independent anti-corruption bodies like NABU, and they will be helping the judicial reform and the reform of general prosecution. The question is which components will be dominating. It is important that in September there was a nice news from the US Congress. The draft law Stand for Ukraine was passed. It is important because it has sanctions. It allows to provide lethal weapons to Ukraine and prohibits to recognize the annexation of Crimea till Ukraine says that it returned the control and its sovereignty. That's briefly. There are many details. If you have questions, I will be ready to answer. Leonid.
Thank you, Yelena. Not just the leadership from TRUMAN company comes from outside Ukraine, but some other partners, and that's why I will continue my presentation in Russian. Before coming closer to the relations with Transnistria, I would remind such a date that we reviewed period between June 1st and September 30th, and the second that the information that we collected from open sources was also supplemented with a lot of interviews with different stakeholders, diplomats, bureaucrats from many agencies, and of course experts. Looking at the period between June 1st and September 30th, we must state that Transnistria not occasionally had become the special topic of this current issue of foreign relations review. Alongside with such big players as Germany, France, Russia, relations, Transnistria events, in particular revival of the negotiations and brushing up the format of these negotiations forced us to pay close attention to this location. Germany had authorized Germany and the United States put a lot of effort, and the negotiations in new format were revived. For example, Germany requested that Chisinau should recognize diplomas and numbers issued in Transnistria. this caused the resistance of Moldova and the parties did not come to agreement in this point. The parties in our case are Moldova and Russia, actually, not Germany, of course, and these two countries were the parties to an agreement which was concluded in 1992. I would like to point out that non-agreement about numbers, maybe number plates on the cars, could actually involve or have impact on Ukraine also, because in this case Russia may try to use the same model that it tried to use in Moldova, further in Donbass. Later, they might say that, look, we have reached agreement about number plates on car number plates with Moldova, and later to make pressure on Ukraine and underscore that Ukraine would be less negotiable than Moldova. This is the aspect which I would like to emphasize, that Transnistria conflict actually influences the optics through which regional forces, regional politicians view the conflict in Donbass. The second important aspect which should be mentioned is the Shevchuk decree, President Shevchuk decree, and which stated that the majority, based on the referendum from 2006, where the majority presumably expressed the will to join Russia. This was Transnistrian referendum. As far as I know, people in Transnistria in 2006 that order by Shevchuk was to strengthen his position on the eve of elections, which will be held in December. His opponent, Krasnoselsky, has bigger chances to win, and presumably may have 24% of votes against 11% of votes by Shevchuk. So that decree that I mentioned should be seen from the local policy point of view. Russia had responded to that decree very in very Russian style. They immediately responded that we won't take any decision by the moment when we see who will win in Transnistria. We will see who will win and then decide whether we like the president or not, whether he will be pro-Russian or not. In a week, elections in Moldova will be held on October 30th, and Um, uh, this will have big impact on future relations between Russia and Moldova and between Russia and Ukraine. The next issue is about military exercises. This is an important aspect. This time, they were different from the previous military exercises. Why? Mm, from the moment when Russian aggression in Ukraine began, Russia has been holding its military exercises in Transnistria almost every month. Why? Because they why it is different. They have now in Transnistria operational group of the Russian military in Transnistria, which stays in Transnistria illegally, unlike peacemaking forces of Russian army. And doing this, Russia demonstrates once again that it is a party to the conflict, the party to the conflict in Ukraine, because their military teams participate in exercises in Transnistria, having no mandate to be there. I think that it's worth for Ukraine to pay attention on the process going on in Moldova, in Transnistria, and to keep in mind that Transnistrian region is an important factor in regional security for Ukraine. For example, Russian army recruits soldiers to Russian army from Transnistria, who have double citizenship, Moldovan citizenship and Russian citizenship. And thus, recruiting these people, they are enlarging number of the military in the region. Sergey, thank you very much. I would like to add more about key element of our research is digital assessment of our relations, of our foreign relations. The objective of this digital analysis was to compare relations with different countries. I think that due to our analysis, the Russian-Ukrainian relations became a champion in negative sense. It has got minus 49 points. Of course, this is very intensive sphere of relations, but unfortunately, it is full of negative events, and we found it very difficult to find any possible events in these relations. But even those positive signs that we found, they are not definitely positive. When Madam Merkel and Mr. Holland force Putin to meet with President Poroshenko, and the meeting happens in China, but the absence of the president of Ukraine actually destroys the effect of this meeting. The same is true about framework agreement about disengagement of forces. On the one hand, this is a positive sign, positive step in relations, but actually, in fact, the withdrawal of forces is going on very slowly, and and is lagging behind. When we look at the positive directions, EU Ukraine plus 28 points, Ukraine US relations plus 20, and Ukrainian China plus 13 points. What is interesting that we had not so many negative events, but I think my colleagues will develop more on this issue and describe that negative. What happened to that negative events? When we look at Ukrainian-Russian relations, we may see that they definitely reflected Russia's attempts to discredit Ukraine. Russia continued to destroy all the possibilities for dialogue with Ukraine, despite public statements that they are ready to maintain this dialogue. For example, when it was suggested to have a normal format meeting in China, first Lavrov expressed Russia's readiness, but then after inspired operation in Crimea, they finally rejected. They made an attempt to discredit Ukraine in the eyes of our Western partners and rejected from Normandy format in China. But this was just one of such operations aimed at discrediting Ukraine. For example, Russian leadership stated that Ukraine is unable to continue transit to transit of gas to Western countries. Also, they expressed doubts in the capacity of Ukrainians gas storages. They expressed the disagreement. They expressed doubts that Ukraine would would accept credentials of the Russian ambassador in Ukraine, although this was done actually by Moscow. They made it impossible. We should state that relations with Russia became very negative, and quite recently this relations between Russia and the Western partners deteriorated considerably due to Syria events. So this was for the benefit of Ukraine. That's why Putin, who got trapped into the results of his own foreign policy, had to make step back and to agree on a discussion about Syria and Ukraine at the same time. I believe that Russia won't stop its efforts to discredit Ukraine, and I do not share the optimism of Ukrainian leadership in its hope that by the end of November we'll be able to develop the roadmap for improving the situation and implementation of Minsk agreements. And I do not hope that Russia will give up, that they will also try to make a hostage of the EU and Ukraine in case of cold winter. Thank you.
Thank you. In fact, the relations with the European Union and with Ukraine are most intensive. The main role is played by foreign political agency. All the actors are playing in the European direction. There are many delegations going from Kiev to European Union, and I was trying to identify the main trends in this period to understand the general picture, because very often we lose the understanding of trends. The main thing is that Kiev has several questions to European Union, and these are visa liberalization, introducing visa-free regime, economic sanctions against the Russian Federation, financial assistance, and completion of ratification of the association agreement. And during the quarter, we managed to achieve certain progress. The sanctions were extended. In the end of that period, there was a decision made about summit. The date of the summit was identified, and if there is the summit Ukraine-EU, that means that there will be some positive news for Ukraine. And visa liberalization, which is on agenda. Well, yesterday we heard from the President of Ukraine that that is the issue that will be decided at the summit. The Brussels has its own agenda, which is concentrated on reforms. The Brussels clearly states its priorities, which are anti-corruption reform, reform in the sphere of energy sector, judicial reform, and decentralization. And there was a big project launched. Europeans want not to have some loud cases. They want to have the institutions strengthened. And the National Anti-Corruption Bureau should be really independent. There were some conflicts in this period of time. As I've mentioned, anti-corruption reform is one of the priorities for European Union, and any delays by Ukraine are perceived in European Union as very concerning trends. In the period of holidays, vacations in the middle of August, there were statements made by the EU that electronic declaration should be launched with the certificate of security. The reaction was very quick, the position was very clear, and for the country, which is not considered to be the member, participation of European Union in the internal processes in Ukraine is unprecedented for European Union. During this period of time, we saw how attention was distracted from Ukraine because of the internal problems in the EU, because of the Brexit, which led to debates in the European Union as to the future of the European Union. All these discussions will affect in the future as well whether Ukraine.
But the issue is not just in the fact that the attention is withdrawn, not because of the events of Ukraine, but because the a slow pace of reform and because of the political obstacles, because of the weak work of the institutions. When the result comes slowly, the interest in Ukraine is weakening, and I'm afraid that in case Ukraine is not contributing enough effort, the interest will drop down. Good afternoon. First of all, I would like to start with the thanks. I am grateful for attention to China. I think that the recent presentation of Audit, Ukrainian-China relations, I think was an important event. I am grateful to TRUMAN Foundation for their attention to this topic. I think that that plus 13 points in our relations with China does not mean that everything is magnificent and fantastic in this area. The issue is that we started from almost zero or minus point in our relations. That's our progress could be seen as something. So on the one hand, the fact that Ukraine's hearings in Chinese parliament is an important event. On the other hand, the letter which they wrote in conclusion to Ukraine shows no progress on the one hand. Then we have got a new ambassador from China. On the other hand, they marked the day of Ukrainian independence. Plus, in our index, in plus 2, these are events initiated by Chinese party. When Chinese ambassador in the UN makes a statement that Crimea is recognized by China as a territory of Ukraine. I think this is an important event which we mark as +2 position, as when we receive congratulations from Chinese leaders on the Independence Day. We again assess this +2 because this is the manifestation of the Chinese interest to Ukraine. They patiently wait when we notice them and pay attention. And I see another aspect is that it is very, which is important, that Ukrainian leaders started to visit the Chinese events in Kiev, because in the past the main Ukrainian guests this year we had Vice Speaker Herashchenko, Vice Prime Minister Zubko, and Vice Prime Minister Klimpush-Syntsadze, who attended the appointment of the new ambassador to Ukraine. I have to quote an ambassador of China to Ukraine. In China, we have started our anti-corruption work. The power is able to spoil people. The absolute and the absolute power spoils, and the bureaucrats should be brought to the cage of legislation. Another interesting statement was that China is Ukraine in the east, and that Ukraine is actually China in the European Union. A good statement, and I think it's a good thought for us to think twice what he meant. During last 2 years, we wasted our time not developing relations with China, but the history repeats itself twice. Nevertheless, the case with Mriya is a good warning for us. We should pay attention to it. So the positive aspect is that Ukrainian Ukrainian authorities had draw their attention to China. I think meeting of Speaker Parubi with the Chinese party is a very important sign. I think that we will come closer to China and resolve political issues which are multiple in our relations. Thank you very much. Maybe you have questions. No input to the mic, unfortunately. I'm Переполиця Григорій, Institute of Foreign Policy, Diplomatic Academy of Ukraine. I would like to thank to all the experts for analytical material, but I have comments on the methodology. Do you think that the format of cooperation between Belarus, Moldova, Ukraine in analysis of relations with Russia is not relevant. We cannot compare the scale of the affair in case of recognition of the car number plates and the number of perished servicemen in the East is irrelevant to weight the importance of these events. This reflects that everything is okay with Russia, and Moldova is in peaceful situation with Russia as well as Belarus. And this methodology suggests that our relations with Russia are peaceful.
I am saying that the comparison of Russian-Ukrainian relations with the relations of Moldova or Belarus with Russia is not relevant. We are not doing it because the situation is different. If once you are not doing it, you need to register something else because your indicators do not talk about quality of relations, Ukraine-Russia. Minus 49, it doesn't say anything. It doesn't give us anything about quality characteristic. May I finish what I'm saying? I switch to the second remark related to the quantitative indicators, plus or minus. You understand these indicators, quantitative, they're not talking about quality. Once we are talking about quality, we need to talk about criteria which identify this quality. But here you are talking about signing the documents, about funding. Why don't you have the criteria, the number of losses in our relations, number of ruined houses, the infrastructure which has been ruined? Why these criteria are not in this assessment? Because that is what talks about our real relations. But when you're talking about numbers, that is just quantity. But qualitative relations, these are relations of peaceful existence, the relations of partnership, of strategic partnership, and that is what characterizes the quality and nature of relations. That has two parts, quality and quantity. Talking about quantity, other parts will be presented as required by our partners. Here's a small resume as to quality. As to quantity, it could be discussed. Our group spent a lot of time to define different indicators, to compare the relations which are the relations in peaceful situation and the relations in the times of war. It's not relevant. Thank you for your remarks. We'll try to take them into account. But if we try to say that the number of shellings was now -5, that would mean that this criteria is just about Russia. When we talk about -5, we talk about different things, shellings including. Maybe we will expand the digital categories. Another question and comment. Thank you, Natalia Belitzer, Institute of Democracy, named after Philip Orlik. Again, I would like to thank all people who worked on this very important issues, and especially I would like to thank Leonid Litra, whose attempts to draw more attention to Transnistria region, I believe, have not been properly assessed by Ukrainian expert community. A few comments, if I may, on that and the question in the end. It has been mentioned about the format 5+2, about the attempts and results. There was a very interesting remark that we need to pay attention not at the position of Transnistria but at the position of Russia. The argument was given on the on signing of peaceful agreement, and we would like to add to that an important decision of European Court on Human Rights of 2004 in case Alyashka and others, where Strasbourg Court clearly stated that Pridnestrovye is an occupied by Russia territory. And that is why the decision was applied to Russia. So I believe that little attention is paid to that fact, and the whole history of negotiations in the format 5+2 demonstrates that there's nothing to expect, irrespective of who's presiding. The format itself is wrong because practically Russia has two votes that separatists have equal status in negotiations, that the country aggressor and occupant plays the role of the mediator and guarantor, and there are transparent hints at the situation in Ukraine with both Minsk process and Normandy format. What could be the consequences of all that? Maybe we cannot expect a quick success, but I believe that to intensify common efforts on changing this format 5+2 to just 7, this should be done. There is more interesting situation as to Ukraine. We remember the initiative on the format Geneva Plus, which wasn't just the Ukrainian initiative, which has been approved and supported in 2 resolutions of European Parliament of this year. I mean the resolution of the 4th of February 2016 and also from 12th of May. Why Ukraine, which should have been mostly interested in that, why nothing is happening in Ukraine, and no one's talking about Geneva Plus. For both formats and negotiations, what is the possibility of the blackmail that there is there, and it is a powerful tool which leads to the situation when the world community is happy, when they agree to resume, and the negotiations for the sake of negotiations is better than no negotiations, and that gives positions not to the benefit of Moldova or Ukraine.
Дякую. Мне говорят коллеги, что...
My colleagues are saying that we don't have time to provide answer. We can give extra 5 minutes, then we'll take maybe one more question from the ambassador. Thank you. Of course, I'm joining this appreciation of the research. The points, that's a relative category, but that's like a roadmap or an indicator which allows to understand what are the bilateral relations of Ukraine with the US, European Union and China. It looks like these 2.5 months which are left till the end of this year will be very tense for Ukraine. That's developing the roadmap based on the meetings in Berlin. That is preparation to summit Ukraine, the EU on the 24th of November. And also the president says that by that time Ukraine will get a visa-free regime. That's elections of the new president of the US. It looks like Clinton should be elected, but in politics, there might be changes. I would pay attention to the fact that the new ambassador of the United States started her work in Ukraine, and the new general secretary of the UN has been elected, and Ukraine now needs to work hard with him, even though officially he will start working on the 1st of January, and in February Ukraine will be presiding in the Security Council. Why I am concerned with the position of Yovanovitch? In her interview she said that Baltic scenario is ahead of Ukraine. The US were not recognizing the occupation by the Soviet Union, the occupation of Baltic states till 1991. So if we look at the Earth from the Moon or Mars, that's maybe normal phenomena, but Ukraine cannot wait as long and cannot be satisfied with this position. I believe her position will be adjusted by the Secretary of State, by the Vice President of the US, because that is not what Ukraine should be looking for. If you may, we will not be able to answer a single question. On the 29th of October, we'll be celebrating the National Day of Turkey. We will see what will be the attitude of the leadership of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the leadership of the state to that, because on the 20th of August, the highest level presented there was the head of department of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. If we want to have good relations all over the world, then at least we need to attend such events as to the US. And Madam Yovanovitch, that's in the text as to her statement. That is not just her position. Several representatives of American government were saying that they will be building their strategy in relation to Crimea on the doctrine of Wallace, and that's the plan that was developed as to Baltic states, non-recognition of the occupation by the Soviet Union. We mentioned that. I mentioned that in my paper that was presented in March this year. That's not her position, that's the position of the US government as to Geneva Plus. I believe that this issue has no alternative, and that has become the synonym of how realistic it is. After the preliminary negotiations on Geneva Plus with our key partners with the US, it was clear that we have no that our Western partners have no political will to start the process Geneva Plus, and we are the hostages of Minsk process till a certain period of time. Ukraine cannot support strategic partnership with all the countries of the world, but answering Mr. Ambassador, I would like to support if Ukraine wants to complete a big missile space project with Brazil, then the attitude to Brazil should be different. Thank you. Thank you. And I would like to make an announcement that this Friday, the day before presidential elections in Moldova, we will make the presentation of Ukraine-Moldova policy. It will be very interesting. Thank you.